Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Stephen Shalowitz, coming to you from the sidelines of the Jewish National Fund USA 2025 conference in sunny Hollywood, Florida, where our featured guest is international broadcaster and Israel advocate Erin Molan. Erin, it is so lovely to have you. Thanks so much for joining us on IsraelCast.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I mean, this city, first of all, is insane. I went swimming this morning at 7 a.m. and the water was warm. Now, I know in the big scheme of the issues we're tackling around the world, this is minor, but it helped me start my day beautifully. So very excited.
But you're an Aussie girl, so you feel right at home here.
Do you know what? I am absolutely, but I can't, well, hopefully no one in Australia listens, but it was almost more beautiful here this morning. I live right next to Bondi Beach as well, so that's probably going to get me kicked out of Australia. But no, it's a beautiful place. It's just a great vibe here, incredible people who all care deeply about things that really matter. So it's lovely to be here.
And that's what we're going to be talking about. But before we begin our conversation, I just want to share with you and our dear audience around the world that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, connecting high school and college students to Israel, and helping our brothers and sisters in need following the heinous October 7th terrorist attack. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Plus, we'd love it if you subscribe, rated, and reviewed us. 5 stars, of course, wherever you get your podcasts, right? It has to be 5 stars. Absolutely. Wherever you get your podcasts, and please share the show within your orbit. And with that, we welcome you back, Erin, to the program. And really, I'd just like to begin by having you share with us how you got Israel engaged really first parts.
So I guess, engagement with Israel started fairly late. I was a sports host, a sports anchor in Australia for 15 years. So covering issues in the Middle East and politics and national security and foreign affairs was not really my job or my role, but it was my passion outside of my job. But because I worked in mainstream television and sport, there was no real platform for me to share these views. My dad was a major general in the army. He was an Australian senator, in fact, the most voted for Australian politician individually in the history of Australian politics. So he was an amazing man. And he and I would spend hours and hours talking about this stuff all the time. And there came a stage in my life when I realized that I was far more interested in this space than I was in the state of a footballer's groin at 11 p.m. on a Friday night, which is when I used to host Friday Night Football. So I moved into this space, and about 2 years after I started hosting my own show on Sky News Australia, and a big part of my focus, which I know is yours as well, was the rising threat of China, particularly where we are in Australia, and the geopolitical challenges that come with that. It was something I spent a lot of time covering, but when October 7 happened, for me, that was, well, it changed my life and my world. And I think initially, it wasn't so much the atrocities that occurred. I mean, my dad had fought in Iraq. He'd fought against Al-Qaeda, ISIS. I had heard and seen about terrorist attacks and horror. I'd been exposed to that my whole life. The difference here, the thing that scared me more than anything else, was the reaction of my fellow Australians, and that terrified me, to be honest. 2 days later, I'm looking at people celebrating in front of the Opera House, Australians celebrating what was one of the most horrific, evil attacks I've ever seen. That scared me. And I realized then and there pretty quickly that my voice, I mean, there was going to be blowback, absolutely, but it mattered far too much to stay silent. And that's when I went on my show. It was a weekly show. And I, not thinking in it for a second it would be controversial, really. I stood against terrorism and I stood alongside the nation that had been the victim of that terrorism, and it blew up.
I want to talk about Australia in just a moment, but you had said that you recognize that it's a fight bigger than Israel versus Hamas versus the other terrorist groups. And I'm wondering if you can just elaborate on that, exactly what was or what you think that fight is.
Absolutely.
And how does it relate then to the Western world?
Absolutely. Look, I think if you don't see this as bigger than Israel v. Hamas, then you've got your head buried in the sand. I think you've got some serious self-reflecting to do. I think, in fact, what a wonderful existence you must lead, and how naive and simple your life must be. I'm jealous, insanely jealous. It's so much bigger. Of course it is. And all you need to do is look at Europe, look at the UK, look at Australia, look at America, look around the world to see what is going on. It always starts with the Jews and with Israel, absolutely. But this evil, as it manifests itself, has been digging its claws into Western society and civilization as we know it for decades now. For decades, it's just suddenly become acceptable to show it. And they've done that in very subtle ways. The money from Qatar, universities, even preschools in Australia, we're teaching our kids that we're racist and that we're colonizers and that we should hate ourselves. How do we expect any generation of kids to adopt the values of our nation when we're teaching them that to hate ourselves and to not be proud of who they are? So if you look back, we can see how we got here, regardless of how horrific it is. This is about what do we stand for? Do we want to fight for peace, democracy, freedom? This impacts so many more people in the world. It impacts everybody. And I say this because people often say to me, thank you so much for your voice standing up for Jewish people, for Israelis. And I say, absolutely proud to do it. But my fight is selfish as well because I've got a 7-year-old child and I see what is going on around the world and the kind of country I want her to live in when she's 20 will not exist if people like me don't speak up. So everything's under threat. Look at universities, look at marches in the street. I look at feminists in Western nations marching alongside Hamas flags. Make that make sense to me. If you don't see this fight as being bigger, then you are naive.
Talk about your last days at Sky News for us.
My last days at Sky News, look, I loved my job there. I loved my existence there. It was my show. It was called Erin, and it was
Uplifting.
it was really brilliant. Thank you so much. The creativity that went behind that, it was insane. I know it's very obvious, but keep it simple, stupid. Look, it was really hard. I'm not going to lie or sugarcoat it. I'd lost in the space of 3 months. I'd lost every mainstream media job that I'd had, and I'd been in the media for 2 years and never lost a job, which is a very privileged existence in our line of work. I understand that, but it was hard. It was really hard, and it kind of it blew up in a big way. And look, I'm not going to get into the whys or Sky News Australia have been really good in this space. They've got people who are really good in this space. I was told it was for budgetary reasons, but it all happened, and it made global headlines, and it became a very big thing. But I guess at the core of that, I'm a single mom who had just lost all of my jobs. I've got a child that I look after and support, and it was terrifying. It was awful, and it's in such a public way as well. I think I'm a very proud person. I've always had professional success. I've always worked incredibly hard, and that's paid off. So to have the headline as me losing all my jobs in the global stage was, it was hard. It was tough on my ego. It was all these different things. But I tell you what, I went very quickly in a matter of days from, oh my Lord, what am I going to do, to all of a sudden thinking, wait a minute, my stuff, particularly towards the end there on Sky News, went viral every week, millions and millions of views. Sky News is a studio. I don't need them for a studio. Everything I say is off the cuff, or if it's a scripted piece, I write every word myself. That's my superpower. I'm a writer by nature. Way back, that's my passion. So I suddenly thought, well, if I can replicate or do something, then there's a need and an appetite for my content. So I very quickly went into, wait a minute, screw them, stuff them. I can do this without them, and I did.
We're going to talk about also what you're doing now in just a second. But for you, it was more than just leaving Sky News. That you had death threats.
Oh my gosh.
And so this was really, really dangerous. And so how did you approach that? How did you, protect your daughter, for example? Can you sort of weigh in on that?
And that happened prior to me losing my job, well prior. So that was essentially, I went on air and did that first show afterwards.
After October 7th.
After October 7th, doing what I thought would be a very normal, rational reaction for most people in the world who are good and decent, which would be to be completely scathing of Hamas and to be heartbroken for Israel and for the Jewish people. And then just this flood. And look, I've been in the public eye in Australia for 20 years. I was the first woman to host different sporting shows, so I understood death threats. In fact, I've been behind world first online legislation to try and clean it up and to protect children from death threats online. So I thought that I was battle-hardened. I thought I understood that world, but I very quickly realized that in my old world, I used to get hammered, absolutely, but they were all, blokes in their mother's basement that were never going to follow through. The difference in this space are these are people who are capable of this thing, who believe in the ideology, who are very more, I guess, how do you put this?
Militant.
Well, 100%. And the veracity of these threats and the credibility of these threats was significant. And they were coming from places that you don't want to be getting death threats from. And so very quickly, it all blew up. And of course, the next week I went on the show, and instead of cowering and choosing to cover, Ukraine and Russia, I went even harder, because that's how I was raised. And, whilst I was scared in a way, not for myself, for my little girl, because she was brought into a lot of this, um, I look at it as pick your hard now. So, yes, the death threats are awful. She had to go to her father for a period of time. There are instances where things need to occur to keep me safe that I could never have imagined, given that all I do is tell the truth. And I fight terrorism and I stand up for the innocent victims of it. But I look at pick your heart. Yes, it's hard now. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, when I go places and need security, and it's insane. But what I hope comes out of this is a safer world for my child. So I have immense guilt about the fact that what I do endangers my child every day. I have a sick feeling every day, but I genuinely believe that what I am doing is fighting to make her world safer. So that's how I justify it to myself.
And what does she know about the work that you're doing?
Look, I get stopped a lot in the streets, and it's really interesting. I live in the eastern suburbs in Sydney, which a lot of Jewish people live there. So I get stopped a lot, and people want to hug me, and a lot of people cry.
You can't get your groceries done, right?
Yeah, look,
Can't run your
so
errands.
she knows it's different though. There's been a shift. I've always been famous in Australia, but prior to that, it was people thought it was cool I hosted sports, so people would ask for photos, but no one would be moved to tears by by meeting me. Whereas now she knows that I do something a little bit special. It's funny though, you can't impress her. She's 7. I dropped a girlfriend off at a shul for one of the celebrations last week. I still get confused. It was something, yes. And a few people saw me get out and hug her and made me go in. I just come from the beach. I felt so inappropriate. There's about 1,000 people in there at Central in Sydney. And the rabbi mentioned that I was there, and everyone stood up, and it was incredible, so emotional, beautiful standing ovation. And Eliza was there, my daughter was there. And I kind of said to her afterwards, sweetheart, when mummy has to go away or mummy's doing different things, it's because I'm helping people like Tali, my girlfriend's name, and Kelly, one of her friends who's got a Jewish daughter. And I said, this is why people are very grateful to mummy, because she stands up for them even when it's hard sometimes. She kind of looked at me and she goes, yeah, but you didn't get to go up on the stage. Yeah. And I was like, okay, do you know what? When a standing ovation of 1,000 people is not enough, what can I do?
Exactly.
So look, she definitely doesn't understand the danger, and I hope to keep it that way. When I was in Israel, I got stuck during the 12-day war. That was a bit hard because people at school started to talk about the fact that her mummy was being bombed, and so that was a little bit tough.
Yeah, I was going to ask, have the parents then approached you, and if so, what have they said to you?
Yeah, look, it's hard to navigate. The one positive, if you call it that, again, a lot of Jewish kids at her school. So I am very popular at drop off and at pick up, incredibly so. But there's also an element there of I think them being conscious, and me as well, because I make a choice to be very public in my fight. That in terms of being identified around the school or people who wish me harm, it's a balancing act, and I try and keep it very separate. I have my entire career. I don't put my daughter's face online. I'm very protective of her privacy. I would never share things that would identify her school or anything else. But I think parents, do you know what? Funnily enough, I'm probably the least of their concerns when you look at how the Jewish community has been targeted in Australia, which is sad to say.
Right. You referenced your father, Major General Erin Molan. He passed away in January of 2023. So before October 7th, what would he make of your work? Because clearly he's had an influence on you.
He's the greatest person I've ever known, and he's had the greatest influence on my life. And I say that with absolute love for my mom, who is the greatest person that I know. But Dad was amazing. Dad embodied everything in the world that I considered to be special, that I value. He was brave. He fought for our nation. He was willing to give his life in the service of people he will never meet. He fought terrorism at the coalface. He ran the war in Iraq for the US and coalition forces. General Petraeus handpicked him to do that. He did a superb job. He would say to us always, even if it's hard, always do what is right. Always, even if it's hard. And he was just an incredible human being. And one of the things, he died about 8 months before October 7, and I had not, up until that point, forgotten that he died or gone to call him at 8 months. And that was the first time I picked up my phone to call him, was when October 7 occurred. I think he would be immensely proud. He was an incredible ally of the Jews and of Israel. And it's funny, before October 7, people, and after he died in that period, people would stop me in the streets and say, your dad was such an incredible ally of our Jewish Australian community. And I would smile and say, oh, that's so lovely, and walk away thinking, I understand what your people went through. Would you need allies now? I had absolutely no idea what existed under the surface. So he was incredible. He's everything that I hope to be one day, and I hope that he is looking down and he is proud. I'm sure he would be. It's probably the one Mum and I often say. She'll see me, the president of Israel, or with the Trumps, or doing something, or traveling the world and doing this stuff, and she would say, Dad would be so proud. And I hope he is.
He's watching over you. I can
I
tell.
think so. I found it really hard when he first died. He and I were so close, and he would come on my Sky News show every week, and he was an Australian senator. Again, I say it again because I'm so proud, the most voted for politician in Australian history. So incredibly popular in Australia. People loved him. I struggled to connect. People would say, oh, you can still speak to him in your head, and you can still, and I couldn't do that. I've never understood how to do that. But I feel like lately I've felt his presence a lot more.
That's a process.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because of him and his work, you lived in Indonesia. You
Yeah.
grew up in Indonesia. We should share with our wonderful audience around the world, which includes listeners in Indonesia.
Yeah.
We have listeners in countries with which Israel has no diplomatic ties, that you are fluent in Bahasa Indonesia. And so, first and foremost, you have a message for anyone in Indonesia right now
Absolutely.
listening.
Halo, apa kabar? Nama saya Erin. Saya suka sekali Jakarta. Saya tinggal di situ untuk 7 tahun. Dan saya pikir bagus sekali Presiden Prabowo di United Nations. Saya senang sekali. Saya pikir mungkin dekat Indonesia dan Israel berdua sama-sama saya pikir. Jadi saya mau bantuan, dan sekarang saya pergi ke Indonesia banyak, dan saya bicara dengan tourism minister dan foreign minister, dan saya pikir mudah-mudahan bagus sekali dekat.
And usually that means I understood a few of those words because I do understand a few words of Bahasa, but
Look,
I knew the sama-sama.
Sama, same. I'm saying, and I genuinely, this is, I think, puts me in a slightly different space from a lot of other people in this world who talk a lot about this, in that I spent a long time in a Muslim nation, the world's largest Islamic nation, and I love the people passionately, care very deeply. They will say to me privately, we hate Islamic extremism more than anyone. We are hurt by it more than anyone. Indonesia's done one of the best jobs of eradicating it domestically. Not entirely, that's impossible, but particularly after the Bali bombings, and they had their own issues. They know how evil a force it is. And I'm doing lots of different things around trying to improve that relationship between Israel and Indonesia. And I think I mentioned President Prabowo at the United Nations. I don't think people quite understand how big a deal that is. How big a deal that is, the president of the world's largest Islamic nation standing there and saying shalom and acknowledging Israel's right to exist, which should just be obviously a base level show of respect, but we know how complex the world is, and that's significant.
After President Trump spoke at the Sharm el-Sheikh conference, I noticed that the Indonesian president approached him and they were having a side conversation there. And I thought, boy, would I love to be fly on the wall there, because I could almost see him saying, we want to get into the Abraham Accords. It's just a matter of time. We have to make sure that everything is in place, etc. but they're going to press the button. And I think it'll be so advantageous for both countries.
Incredible.
Indonesia is a remarkable, remarkable country. It's such a diverse and beautiful place. Indeed, I've been there many times. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Susan Sontag, who said, "Living life abroad facilitates living life as a spectacle." And I'm just wondering, your experience having lived life abroad
Yeah,
must have impacted you in the work
absolutely.
that even you're doing today, because I would have to imagine that it carries with you all your life.
It really does, and it's such a great point you bring up, and that's I'll look that quote up after I leave. I love doing that, and then I'll screenshot it into my little note section of things that I go back to and have a look at. It really does change everything about the way you see the world and who you are. And I think particularly when you are young, when you're very impressionable, and I often look at kids in Australia who are so blessed, so privileged, as we were prior to going to Indonesia, and have absolutely no idea what the real world actually entails. And when I was 7 or 8, I would go to school and I would go past traffic lights where there were lepers and there were kids begging. Mum and Dad were adamant that we immerse ourselves in the culture of Jakarta, that we learn the language, that we understand the customs, that we're so respectful to the Muslim religion, that we dress appropriately, that we don't use our left hand because that's disrespectful, and all these different things. I'm so grateful for that because it meant that when I went back to Australia, and looked around and didn't see that kind of poverty, it made me, even though I couldn't quite have articulated it back then, it made me so grateful for what we had. And it developed in me this, mum tells this story of, I was a gymnastics coach and we had two postings. So dad was the army attache and then the defense attache. And I would coach gymnastics on the second posting there as a 14-year-old, and I would get US dollars in this yellow envelope. Probably didn't pay tax on it, but it's 20, 30 years ago now.
Our
So
little
I'm sure.
secret.
Our little secret. You guys don't have many listeners, do you? No. So, and mum would talk about the fact that I'd get home from gymnastics and not have a cent left because every traffic light that we stopped at, I was incapable of not putting down the window and giving it to beggars. And I think I've always been such an empathetic person. And I think that that's another thing that is so interesting in this space is that in Australia, I'm renowned for doing too much charity work. I say yes to everything. I exhaust myself. I'm an ambassador for this. I've had organizations say, hey, you kind of got to stop because you're such,
Spreading yourself too thin.
because I'm incapable of saying no because I care so deeply. So that's the interesting part of this space that I'm in now. And when people come at me with, you support kids being killed in Gaza and I just, it's insanity because I read a headline about a child being hurt and I feel physically ill and I have tears. I am,
And you're a mother.
and I'm a mother. I feel as deeply about children in Gaza as I do about children in Israel. I'm just smart enough to understand who their enemy is. And I know that by protecting Hamas and by running cover for Qataris and Iran and the terrorist organizations, I'm not doing a thing to help them. So this suicidal empathy that we, that is used to kind of say, oh, but you should be fighting it. No, identify who their actual enemy is. That's how you care about kids in Gaza.
Right.
That's what I do.
Right. A couple other big basics before we push up.
Yeah.
Because I'm mindful of the clock and your time indeed. Can we talk a little bit about what goes on in a newsroom when it comes to Israel and the Middle East, the
Absolutely.
decision-making process of what goes on here?
I'm so glad you brought this up. Now, keep in mind, I was an opinion host at Sky, so I wasn't in a newsroom for any of that kind of where they determine, shouldn't be which angle they take. It should be, let's just tell the truth. And prior to that, I was in sport. But I have so many thoughts on this in regards to how newsrooms work. And I'll give you an example in Australia. And, we would joke about this. So you look at ratings boxes. So Australia is an example. You've got your 6 p.m. news, which is your highest rating news in the country. So Channel 7 and Channel 9, two of the biggest networks, will compete and they'll get almost around the same. One might hit the other, but the number one rating show is your 6 p.m. news. When you look at where the ratings boxes are, so for example, in Sydney, they're in Western Sydney, vast majority of ratings boxes are there. So when a newsroom in Australia is determining how they're going to shape a narrative, that's who they're looking to appeal to. And you look at the populations in Western Sydney, a lot of immigrants in Western Sydney. That's where, you look at Muslim populations, that's where a lot of them live, particularly in political seats as well. There's the seats that are needed to win government have higher populations. So when I look at how it is determined what angle is taken, for example, the start of a story when there was a hostage/prisoner exchange, it's not a hostage swap, FYI. This is a story on mainstream Australia. It was a family reunion, decades in the making, and you're watching a Palestinian prisoner reuniting with his mum. Emotions everywhere. So, and I'm just looking, going, oh, wow, that's like, if I didn't know any better, I'd say, this is so beautiful. This guy is reunited. What they don't tell you is that he blew up a bus 10 years ago. So this is the issue that we're dealing with, is that your newsrooms and media are, for the most part, I feel like they're run by left-leaning people, organisations, etc., which certainly doesn't help. Mind you, if you're left-leaning, shouldn't you be supporting minorities and victims? That doesn't make sense anyway. But the issue is they're trying to appeal to a certain group of people that will ensure that they rate well. And I think that's an issue everywhere and anywhere in newsrooms. My whole thing is, when I was in sport, I would never take an angle when I was reporting, straight reporting. In a commentary role, absolutely give your opinion. What we're seeing now are people who are pushing propaganda, who are in roles where they're purport to be straight news. And that's the issue. It's been completely blurred.
And so did they themselves have those opinions, or they're just looking at ratings? Because it would seem, I mean, from my vantage point, that they're biased.
Well, 100%, 100%. And it's a great question. I know that I used to get a lot of messages when I was on Sky News from people in the commercial networks. I wish I could say that. Totally agree. Blah, 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 blah. So I think not all of them do. I think a fair few of them do. But I think the other issue is, I look at Australia as an example, and I think it's very similar elsewhere. The vast majority of people, I believe, are decent, good people. The problem we have is, so for example, the ABC in Australia, just the opening line of one of their reports, day 780 of Israel's illegal invasion of Gaza. So you think, if you're a single mom, we feel far away in other Western countries. You don't feel like you're that this impacts you directly, but you hear that, you're getting out of the car, you're not going to go there and research like I would do, or you're not going to read 10 articles about it. That shapes your narrative. So as to whether or not the reporters, I think a lot of them do. I think a lot of them have this saying, they've been in universities where they've been told, white people are colonizers, Western nations are colonizers, we're evil, we're racist, we're this and that. So that they're the ones who are now in newsrooms, the ones that have been at universities where Qatari funds have essentially ensured that they've not been educated, they've been indoctrinated.
Is there anything the audience can do to combat that?
My whole thing in this space, and it's a slower way of doing it, absolutely, but I don't see any other alternative. You've got to have one-on-one conversations with people. If everyone who gets it, even your taxi driver, even your hairdresser, even, someone at the coffee room at work, I think that's where the shift happens. And I do it all the time. So I obviously have a big platform. I get millions of views every week. That's great. And I get a lot of Israeli Jewish people who I love passionately, but you are not my target audience. I've got you. My job is to reach.
In other words, don't bother.
No, bother me. What? Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that it's far more important for me to go outside of the echo chamber. And I look at, I've had presidents and world leaders and sing my praises, and it's so lovely and amazing. But the things that stay with me are minor. A guy who works down the mines in Western Australia, a 50-year-old Aussie bloke, probably wouldn't even know a Jewish person, sent me an email after watching one of my clips and said, hey, Erin, I keep seeing all these Palestinian kids on the news being blown up and it's awful. And I thought Israel was so bad, but I've just watched one of your videos and I wanted to let you know that my values and morals have not changed, but the side I now realize they align with has. Thank you. And that to me is far more, in terms of what I gauge as success, and I feel like I sat next to this guy in a plane. He was saying to me something like this a few months ago, and he said, oh, I haven't watched much of your recent stuff, but loved, when you hosted the footy show. And he goes, yeah, the situation in Gaza, the thing I hate most is that Israel, it's a revenge thing. Like, I get what happened to them was awful, but it's this revenge thing. And I went, oh, I said, revenge? I said, and this is prior to the hostages coming out. I said, you realize that Hamas still are capable of killing, have promised to do so repeatedly, and holding like 100 hostages. I said, if on October 9, all the hostages were returned, Hamas laid down their weapons, and that was it, and Israel was still in there operating war, I'd say exactly the same. No, you've achieved your objectives. There's no longer a threat. Your people are home. That's it. I said, but that's not the case at all. And I don't really, my wife keeps showing me all these images, and I'm going to talk to her when I get home because that's such a good, I hadn't even thought of that. I said, I would never support a country who was just killing people for revenge. Even if you thought they might, you can understand why they'd feel so egregious. I said, I'd never do that. But Hamas has promised to continue killing, and they're capable of it, and they've got hostages. And he said, I'm going to go talk to my wife because we were taught, and I just, that to me is, look, it's not as big as Qatari funded bots on social media that can reach, millions and millions, but that's how you change hearts and minds.
I completely agree. It's about outreach, and it's about people that aren't really engaged, or people that have questions or are questioning or don't get another side of
That's
this story.
exactly right.
Because after October 7th, what I did, I posted on social media, if people want to get more information about what Israel is all about, these are the podcasts to listen to, and these are the books to read. These are the people to follow as well. And people have reached out to me afterwards. So I am so on board with what you just shared. Then, as we talk about Australia, I mean, because we see this cascade of anti-Semitism there, can you talk about the level there? Is it just a minority? Is it a small group, but that they're very vocal?
It's not as small as I would have liked it to have been, and maybe I initially thought it was smaller. I think it's bigger, and I think there are so many contributing factors to that. A lot of people are just looking for something to jump on board and hate everything about our way of life.
And it's oppressed versus oppressor, and they look at Israel as the lens of
completely, which is just completely untrue, as you and I know, most people listening.
Yeah.
I look at the defining moment for Australia as being 2 days after, outside the Opera House, where the Jewish population in Australia had organised something to go and mourn 2 days after October 7th, to gather as a community and to seek solace, to mourn what had occurred. And then all of a sudden, police had reached out to the Jewish community and said, don't go. It's not going to be safe for you. So they had told Jews to stay home, but instead, a group of pro-Palestinian, pro-terror, absolute scumbags went to the Opera House, cheered the massacre, used hate speech, threatening words, violence, the whole shebang. And those images were showed all over the world. Not an IDF boot had hit the ground in Gaza. They were celebrating a mass slaughter of Jewish people and people from all over the world. Now, at that point, we have a choice as a country, as a nation, to determine what we accept. And when I say we, our leader and everyday people makes a choice at that stage. Is this a country where this is allowed, where we sit by idly? And, you can talk about free speech. They use hate speech, but whatever. It's not even about that. It's about how does a country react to that, to make sure that it doesn't define who we are or what we stand for. And I watched a prime minister who was weak as hiss, and you can beat that at Gerald.
No, look, you
concerned about this kind of things, like an Australian, who did not come out and set the tone for what we were willing to accept. So I look at every other person in my country who maybe has tendencies towards hate, who is anti-Semitic, who buys into this BS narrative of oppressor and oppressed. And they looked at what happened then. They looked at the reaction, which was meek, it is nothing. They looked at consequences. Did anyone on that day who yelled things out that are considered under law in Australia as hate speech, as calls to violence, pay a price? Not one. Not one. So that is when we said as a nation, not only do we accept this, but it's a free-for-all, go for gold. And from there, we've just had some of the most horrific incidents. And I didn't even really know a Jewish person prior well, and not because, clearly it's just my circles. It just had never really had a close friend. Now I've got so many, which is lovely. But I've seen firsthand the impact this has had on the community in Australia. I go to Melbourne a lot as well, and synagogues being firebombed, and people having to hide signs of identity. Parents at schools having to drop their kids off with armed guards outside, spray paint graffiti with the most horrific slurs that little kids have to see as they leave school. It's just been horrific. But I maintain hope that it is a minority, absolutely, but I am greatly disappointed by the silent majority, because there comes a time when silence is actually a contributing factor to the hate and the violence that is occurring. And if you leave too much silence in place, it gets filled by these people. And the Australia I know would never stand for this. And I'm deeply let down by the silence of many I thought were better.
If you can connect the dots for me on something, because Sir John Monash was Jewish, and clearly one of the seminal figures of Australian history of the 20th century.
Absolutely.
He's on the $100 bill. There's a university named after him, and on and on. Do people know that he was Jewish?
No, I wouldn't say so, but people, I mean, you tell me, is it on TikTok in 8 seconds or less? Because there's a generation who only know things that are there. And that's the issue. But you look at our Prime Minister, who was leading pro-Palestinian marches and protests when he was at university as a teenager, as a 19-year-old. You look at so many different segments of society that are so loud and so influential. And again, that's one of the issues is that a lot of people, even if they're not the majority, they're in positions of power because of where they live or because of, particular dynamics in parliament, in politics. So you end up having, same as the UK, mind you, their problems, I think, are bigger than ours, tenfold. We're heading there quickly, though, believe you me. But you look at Australia as a whole, and when they're being said, what I told you, the example on mainstream media, day in, day out, it's not that people are anti, but people believe what they're told. They believe it's the ABC, it's our national broadcaster, it's Channel 9 News, it's Channel 7 News. Why would I question it? But then if you actually just peel back a little bit, where are their numbers coming from? Oh, the Gaza Health Ministry. No, that's Hamas. They're terrorists. They lie. They're not renowned for telling the truth. We are having mainstream media quote terrorist sources as fact, and that's what is being fed into mainstream Australia. And not because they're dumb, not because they don't care. They had time poor, cost of living crisis, kids, work stress, relationships. It's not a priority for them to go and fact check national broadcasters.
I'm glad you brought up the government because I'm trying to figure out if it's the chicken or the egg. I mean, how does a new government then impact the narrative that is spread through the country?
Look, I think you've got to want to impact the narrative that's spread through the country. And I suspect the government is very happy with the narrative that currently exists. It's taking up most of the space in Australia. Unfortunately, we've got Senator Penny Wong, the foreign minister, who, when she went to Israel, begrudgingly so, wouldn't even go to the sites of October 7th. I mean, this is our prime minister, not, this whole Starmer, Macron, Carney, Albanese, its recognition of Palestinian statehood whilst Hamas is still in power, whilst there are still hostages in Gaza. The whole thing is just, I mean,
virtue signal.
Absolutely it is. And it does absolutely nothing for anyone except to appease segments of, of your party that you need to, or certain areas where you need to win seats, or yourself, if you're talking about Albanese, because he clearly believes all this stuff, but then goes to meet Trump and pretends like he's, or tries to take credit when Marco Rubio specifically said all of these nations doing this have made it harder for us to negotiate. So I don't think there won't be changes in Australia from the top down until this government is gone.
They should be taking a page from your late father, even if it's hard, do what's right.
Absolutely. Right. There's, in fact, and I love you brought that up, the Argentinian president, and it's a translation.
We love him.
Like, isn't he amazing? He said something to the effect of, in a speech, he said, when you leave politics, when you leave positions of leadership, most people will hate you afterwards. It's just a given. So you might as well do what is right when you're there, rather than this attempt to appease. And it's so weak. It's so unattractive, and it doesn't.
Absolutely. So we just have a couple minutes left.
Please.
You've been to Israel.
I have multiple times.
First time in Israel, and just sort of what's your lasting impression? Sort of when you're flying back to Australia, any sort of things that are swimming through your mind about your visits?
It's an incredible place, and I've been there only since October 7. My first time was after October 7. So I've never been to a bar in Tel Aviv. I haven't had the kind of experience that I want to have one day. It's all been very much for work, in and out, interviews or functions.
You've been to the beach, though.
I have. I've been to the beach. I've been to the beach. No, that was in Herzliya.
Okay.
During the 12-day war, I went into the beach during that period. But it's the most phenomenal place. And even my first trip when I went, and that was to visit all the October 7 sites, that was to watch the raw vision in its entirety, which, there are things that I saw that will never leave my mind. And that's okay, because it reminds me why I fight every single day, and why death threats don't matter, and why this fight matters more than anything else. But what I left with, and this is, I think, what is so magical about Israel, is that when I went to the kibbutz, yes, I saw horror. Yes, I stood inside a room where 3 children were burned alive, having watched their parents be killed, little girls that look exactly like my little girl. As I walked out, I saw a woman tending to roses, and I walked over and I said, "Hi, is this your place?" And she said, No, I don't know the owner, but she's been taken hostage. And I I come once a week to water her roses so that when she's released, her roses will be alive. And it gives me shivers now. I went to another kibbutz and there was a group of American men building. And I said, oh, it's this, rebuilding what Hamas had destroyed. And one of the other guys goes, no, this is one of the best architects in America, super successful, come here for 6 months for free, doesn't know a soul, just wanted to help. And all the other blokes around just volunteering. And I thought, this is Israel. This is Judaism. This is a people who will never, ever be defeated because they love and they care and they won't allow that horror to define them or to change them or to make them bitter. I have not experienced bitterness and I don't know how, because I don't know if I could be that good a person. So I think that's what I leave with. And one last thing, and I've got it in my room now. When I was there the first time, I went and did a big speech at somewhere in Tel Aviv, and this lovely young man, I was doing photos of about 1,000 people, came running up to me before I went inside to speak, and he said, "Oh, I tried to get a ticket and I couldn't get one, but I've just driven a few hours. I wanted to give you something," and he gave me this Israeli flag, and it was a little bit dirty and it had Velcro on the other side. And he said, I just wanted to give this to you and tell you a little story. And he said, it's really quick. I was on October 7, I lost two of my friends. I was sent straight into Gaza. And this is the patch, the flag that was on my uniform when I was sent into Gaza. And he said it was awful and horrific and scary. You go into war, he said, but all of a sudden that became worse because we realized that the world thought we were the bad guys. He said, rather, it's hard enough going to war when people think you're bravely fighting evil. He said, but all of a sudden we started to realize that the world thought we were the bad people. And he said it was flating, demoralizing, it was awful. And he said about a month in, my mom sent me one of your clips from Sky News. And he said, I watched it, called all the other soldiers around and we watched it. And he said it was the first time that we understood that not everyone thought we were bad and that there were people who thought we were heroes who weren't Israeli or Jewish. And he said every week after that, the soldiers would gather around in Gaza and watch your clip from your weekly Sky News show. And he said, I want you to keep this. And it was, anyway, I carry it with me everywhere. And it's because of my dad. I think whatever I do in this space, I hope it makes a difference and it helps. But something that I think about often is that given how highly I think about those who are willing to give their lives in service, if you're in the Defence Force, there's no greater honour in my mind. The fact that it made their existence a little bit easier, it made them feel a little bit less alone, is something that I can't even put into words how much that means to me. So I carry that little dirty, I mean, he could have cleaned it, but no, I love that it's authentic and it's dirty. I carry that in my wallet everywhere I go. And even when I was in Indonesia and I was getting my passport out and it was there, and some of the Indonesians are looking at it, and I proudly have it. And it's something that's very special to me.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Erin Molan, we're going to leave it right there. This is the first of, I hope, many times that you join us here on the IsraelCast podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. And really, Terima kasih. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing, really, for Israel and the Jewish people. And we just want to, once again, heartfelt thanks to you.
Indeed. You.
All right. And we'll have info about Erin on the show note page of this very episode on our website. Erin, talk about your shows just real briefly.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you so much. We just got 100,000 subscribers, so I'm chuffed. So I've got the Erin Molan show, which is on the Salem network, which was Charlie Kirk's network, which is one of the reasons I signed with them. So that was just terrific. All of that, of course. But the podcast, the YouTube show, and yeah, I'd love your support. We do a lot of content in this space. I'm very passionate about it. And yeah, surprisingly, it's going really well. So we'll see.
From strength to strength.
Absolutely.
All right.
So thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate your kind words and your support.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't have to thank me. I tell the truth and I stand with the most incredible group of people, and it is an honor and a privilege to do so.
Right back at ya. And we'll have info, like I say, about Erin on the show notes page of this very episode. Check out all of her fabulous work and follow her on all social media handles as well, because she has a whole lot to say, as you can tell by our conversation, and it's all very much worth listening to. So once again, thank you so much. And of course, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. And just so you never miss an episode, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Simply search for IsraelCast. As I said at the top of the show, don't forget to rate and review us, because that helps with our rankings, which make it easier for more folks around the world to find us and to hear from extraordinary people just like Erin. And indeed, we'd also love to hear from you as well. Do Email us at IsraelCast@jnf.org. Once again, IsraelCast@jnf.org. And as I always say, it takes a homo shop to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Stefan Oberman. We also thank JD Krebs, Jessica Menton, and our editor, Jay Rothman, as well. And the music that you hear at the top and tail of the program is called My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. Once again, IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. We'd love to hear from you. Once again, our email address is israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, coming to you from the Jewish National Fund USA 2025 conference in Hollywood, Florida. Thank you for joining us and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.